everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is HarrisX founder and CEO, Dritan Nesho. Dritan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me back. Good to see you.
It is very good to see you, and a new Harvard Caps HarrisX poll just dropped. And I want to start where we usually do and then go out from there. And where we usually start is President Trump's approval rating. Where is it now?
Well, he's largely flat at about 46% job approval rating. And so we aren't seeing any big shifts within the overall approval rating or in terms of his handling of some of the key issues that he's pushing forward. And that's remarkable. And that's remarkable in many regards. It's remarkable because at 46%, he's doing better than what Obama was doing at the same point in time during his presidency. He's doing better than where Biden was at the same point in time in his presidency. But it's also remarkable because you're not seeing a lot of movement and a lot of shifts, despite all that is going on within the country. And there's clearly some wins for the president, like his handling of immigration. There's clearly some work to be done for the president, and especially in terms of his tariffs and trade policy and his focus on the economy. And then there's some issues in the middle, like foreign affairs, which voters do not have high expectations on, and they're very much on a wait and see posture. But looks like there is progress being made, especially in terms of Israel and Gaza. So a lot in play, and let's just say that the dust still hasn't settled on this administration, but it probably will as we get closer towards the midterms.
I think something we've really seen with President Trump over the past almost decade is that the people that like Trump like him, and the people that don't. So when you're looking at his approval rating and you're seeing how the demographics go, does anything stick out to you?
Well, to the point that you just made, right? Like what's very interesting about his job approval rating is that his job approval rating is just a tad higher than his personal favorability rating. And usually in the past, we've seen much bigger gaps in terms of the personal favorability towards the president and his job approval rating. And what this says is that Trump has improved his personal likability with voters. He's carrying a lot more of Republicans and a lot more of independents than he has in the past. And really, the two elements are tracking. So it's not an issue of style, right? It's really an issue of the policies and perhaps the execution of some of the key policy that the president has. But in terms of demographics, look, the president needs to do better with independents. I mean, independents are dissatisfied with his job approval. I think that's roughly at 53, 54%. Women, especially suburban women, which he was able to pull into his camp and overperform with in the last election. That's something that he and the administration has to bear in mind. And we're also seeing some softness with older voters, and it's purely around economics. And so the challenge really for the president is making sure that Americans understand where the economy really is, and fighting the dour mood or the sour mood of the economy that by and large has lingered even after the election. And so he can't skirt the most important issue, which is still the economy, which is still affordability, which is still inflation. And I don't see the administration attacking it as head on as it should be attacking it, given that this is the issue that registers the most with voters still.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because all of last year, you and I were talking about how voters felt, for the most part, that Trump was better equipped at handling the economy than Joe Biden and then Vice President Kamala Harris. And he won in large part because voters thought that an economy under Trump is better than a Biden or Harris economy. How do voters feel about the economy now, this far into President Trump's second term? And do you think the dust has really settled on that yet?
Well, it hasn't. And I'm going to give you some some remarkable statistics for our viewers as well. So, 56% of Americans, including close to 3 in 10 Republicans, think that the economy is currently shrinking. That's an incredible statistic, especially compared to the fact that in the second quarter, the economy grew by 3.8%. When we ask people specifically, where do they think the economy is, right? 36% say that it's shrinking, it's declining. 14% say 1% growth. 18% say 2% growth. 80% say 3% growth. Only 6% say 4% growth, which is really where the economy was in the second quarter. So there's definitely a problem in terms of communicating where the economy is and helping people understand that despite all of the churn and tumult and shifting policies, the economy is actually doing better than they think. And then also in terms of the question, do you think inflation is above or below 3% a year right now, which is really that benchmark that the Fed tries to keep inflation below? 2/3 of Americans, 65%, think that inflation is above 3% rather than below 3%, where it actually is. And that includes 62% of Republicans. So it's safe to say that the administration has its work cut out when it comes to communicating around the economy. And there's no surprise then that when you ask, do you think Trump's policies are boosting or harming the economy, 58% actually say today that they're harming the economy. And this is a negative trend on this particular question where voters usually have been split roughly 50-50 on whether or not Trump's set of policies are harming or boosting the economy. So the economy, again, remains the top issue, and the art of the deal, or the art of the sale in this case, as we're leading into the midterm, will be on whether or not the administration of President Trump is able to reverse perceptions around the economy so that they track more with reality than with the sour economic mood that voters generally have today.
I'm curious why you think this is, because this was a problem that plagued President Biden and then ultimately the Harris campaign. The numbers on the economy at the last bit of Biden's presidency weren't as bad as people thought they were. Is it because people's financial situations, they don't feel that great about them? A, and B, which party can do a better job at messaging? Or have both parties for the past year or so not been doing great on offense, but have been doing a better job on defense?
Well, both parties haven't done a good job on communicating around the economy. The Republicans, by and large, still have the edge in terms of who Americans trust to handle the economy more. So it's 52% Trump and the Republicans, and 48% the Democrats. But again, when it comes to the I word, the inflation word, right? 56% think that Trump is losing the battle against inflation. And again, if there's one reason why voters broke against Biden and against the Democrats, it's because they felt that they weren't dealing with the most important issue that they should have been dealing with, which was the economy. And because they didn't really think that Kamala Harris had much of a platform or a plan for getting the economy back on track. And they were much more willing to go with Trump and his past track record than with the Democrats and their lack of an approach around the economy. So when you see a statistic like that, 56% thinking that Trump is losing the battle against inflation, that should be raising alarm bells within the White House. And I know that the White House has noticed this poll because they published it when it came to the question of the government shutdown, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. But again, when we look at the atmospherics of the poll, right, and there's a lot of issues and a lot of ways to look at the different issues, there's a lot of things here to like for the administration, but there are some clear warning signals And the biggest of those warning signals is it's the economy, stupid. You better start focusing on it.
And it has always been the economy, stupid, for decades now. And I think that's a message both Democrats and Republicans should heed. Where is the Trump administration doing well, and where are some of their other weaknesses aside from right now inflation?
Well, we keep a scorecard on all of the promises and all of the uh, essentially the intended goals or the broadcast goals that the administration has had. And again, the economy they need to do work on. Um, Tariffs they need to do work on in terms of their messaging and in terms of results as well. A policy which is very controversial is the use of the National Guard and active duty military to police American cities to stop crime and disorder. I don't think that the administration has done as good of a job as they think that they have done in terms of communicating that specific issues, specific issue. And again, they've got some work cut out on them in terms of the prime initiatives that they've had, in terms of the tariffs initiatives that they're pushing for, obviously in terms of the economy, and then Medicare and Medicaid, right? And one of the issues that people are very much on edge about is making cost cuts to Medicare programs by adding work requirements for those up to 64-year-olds. That's the issue that scores the worst in the administration scorecard, with 58% opposing it and 42% for it. Everyone is for eliminating government waste until it starts affecting them, and then they're like, no, 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 don't do that. But where the government is and the administration is scoring clear, home runs or touchdowns is in their initiatives in terms of lowering prescription drug prices for Medicare recipients and low income patients. 86% support that, including 68% who support this new initiative of a government-run website for consumers to buy drugs directly from manufacturers at steep discounts. This is something that was announced just in the last 2 weeks, with Pfizer being the first participant within this government-run website. I think that they call it something along the lines of Trump RX, and it's doing quite well. In terms of deportations, there are reservations in terms of how the deportations are being done. But when you ask about deporting immigrants who are here illegally and have committed crimes, 78% support that, including 69% of Democrats and 77% of independents. And then when we ask the same question, but it's purely around deporting immigrants within the country, and I want to get the numbers right, so I'm looking at this specifically. You still have, on the question of deporting all immigrants who are here illegally and have entered illegally over the last 4 or 5 years, 56% support that, including 76% of Republicans and 54% of independents. So clearly, the posture on immigration is a correct posture on immigration. But when you look at a different angle to it and you say, is Trump overplaying his authority? 55% say that he's going beyond his authority, and 56% say that he's not abiding by all court orders. And we even asked the question, which is a forcing function question with two extremes: is he a strong president, or is he behaving like a dictator? And really, that's a 52-48% split. In part, it's because of the execution of some of these policies, not the policies themselves, which the administration clearly has a lot of support around. And again, when we look at using the US military to target cartels and drug smugglers in Latin America, which is one of those charged issues where, is the administration following the law, or is it going beyond the law? Voters support it. 63% say yes, we can get behind this because it's for the safety and security of the United States. When we talk about an issue like raising fitness and readiness standards in the military and making them gender neutral, right? This was the controversial meeting of all the generals that Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, I should say, Pete Hegseth and the president had. Again, on the substance of it, 61% support the policy, even though they didn't quite like the optics of, the civilian leadership really trying to get the generals to fit a particular political direction or a particular political mold. So there are clear wins for the administration, clear home runs in terms of the policies. There are reservations in terms of the execution, and then there are some policies which, again, especially around healthcare and Medicare and Medicaid, that voters don't really want the administration to touch.
I think we've seen this a lot with President Trump is that public opinion is, hey, I like where his head is at. Hey, I like this policy, except he might be going too far here. Do you think it would do him and the administration some good, especially as we look at midterms about a year away, if they reined Trump in a little bit and said, this policy is good, but you're going too far a little bit here?
I think that obviously there are certain images and certain optics in terms of how the administration is behaving, which are not playing well with voters, even on issues that voters support, and building more of a consensus, getting Congress to go along with the administration, and doing it with a gentler touch would go a long way to improve the administration's numbers, right? Trump had a clear mandate in the last election. He won, he trounced the Democrats, and voters are still with him on the reasons why they elected him. I think that voters are expressing a lot of reservation on the speed through which some of these policies are being implemented and the brashness with which they are being implemented, and they would like to see more of a really a consensus around the approach and really go at it together around the approach. And this is well within the administration's ability to do and to provide, and it should lift up their numbers if they're able to do it.
I do now want to talk about a topic that you touched on earlier in the conversation, and that's the government shutdown. Currently, as you and I sit here, we are in day 7 of this shutdown, and they are always largely unpopular. And I talked to Republicans about this, I talked to Democrats about this, and I've never seen so much daylight on an issue in all of my years of hosting Forbes Newsroom here. Republicans are blaming Democrats, saying they're holding the government hostage over a continuing resolution that they voted for in the past, and almost all Democrats in both the House and Senate voted against the CR that would keep the lights on in the government. But Democrats are saying that it's the Republicans' fault that the right is refusing to negotiate when it comes to health care. I'm curious, when you've asked this in your poll, who do voters think owns this shutdown?
Well, look, 70% oppose the government shutdown. Voters' perspective is that there's a lot in flux and a lot in the air. We don't need another element added to it, especially the ability of the government to be there and to continue its services. Superficially, who do you blame more for the current government shutdown? It's 53% Republicans, 47% Democrats. And I mean that superficially because once you get into the issues, 65% say the Democrats should have accepted the continuing resolution at current spending levels. And that looks quite good for the Republicans. 55%, once they learn a little bit more about the government shutdown, say that the Democrats are just doing this to please their base. They don't really have good reasons to shut the government down. And when you ask them, who do you think will win the government shutdown, 62% say the Republicans will win it. 38% say Democrats. And then even when you look at it from the lens of the midterms, are you more likely to vote Democrat, vote Republican, or does it not affect your vote? 36% are more likely to vote Republican, 34 Democrats. So the Republicans +2, which would be enough for them to, hold and even grow their numbers within Congress, and 30%, it doesn't affect their vote, right? They will vote on some other type of issue. So the atmospherics around the government shutdown um, are in favor of the Republicans. And again, the longer this drags on, the more the Democrats are likely to lose this fight. And so I think that they're in a challenging position. I think that they have a superficial reason why to shut down the government, but it's not really landing with voters as well as they thought that it would be landing. And so there's many reasons to oppose the Trump administration if you're a Democrat, but this one feels particularly thin, and therefore they seem to be on thin ice.
So essentially, these numbers say that the majority of people don't like a government shutdown, but Republicans are winning the political messaging war here. Politically, is Congress taking a hit, though?
Yes, I mean, approval of how Congress is working has taken a 5-point hit already, and it might go even down. But it's only about 32% approval of the job of Congress today, and that is historically low, and it's certainly as low as we've ever seen it within the past in our poll tracking. Um, Democrats' approval in Congress, 42%. It's not as bad as it's been. They've been as low as 36% since the beginning of the Trump administration, but still fairly low. And GOP approval is going down as well, but it's 47%. It's 5 points higher than the Democrats. And here you get also a clear signal in terms of, who is likely to win this fight and how Americans are thinking about this fight and these array of issues.
I want to turn now to a really tragic event we saw last month, and that was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in recent years, we have just seen horrific moments of political violence, from the shooting of Steve Scalise to the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence, the assassination attempt on President Trump, the assassination of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, to now this assassination of Charlie Kirk. What do voters make of this political violence?
Well, the data we collected is fascinating. And again, for our viewers, I'm going to go slow through this data because it highlights the political moment that we're all living in and how polarized it is, but also to some extent the normalization of political violence that we're going through. And this is a problem, whether you're Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, because no society can survive very long with this kind of tension brewing within it. So here's the data, and again, some of it is common sense, and some of it is quite shocking. 75% of voters today that believe that the rhetoric of our politicians have become too extreme, and that includes 83% of Democrats, 79% of independents, and even 2/3 of Republicans, 65% of Republicans. Even with regards to President Trump, 58% say that he's too extreme and they want him to tone it down. Close to 7 in 10, or a little bit over 7 in 10 of Republicans see his rhetoric as appropriate, but it doesn't really sit very well with coveted independents, where 64% basically say that he's too extreme, and even Democrats, of course, you would expect them to say it. When we dig deeper into this and we ask Democrats, do you think the rhetoric of Democratic politicians is too extreme or appropriate? Here, an interesting picture emerges. 33% actually believe that the rhetoric of Democrats themselves is too extreme. Only 67% of Democrats believe that their rhetoric is appropriate. And also 62% of independents believe that the rhetoric of Democratic leaders is too extreme. We asked the same questions of Republicans and independents and even Democrats, actually. Do you think that the rhetoric of leading Republican politicians is too extreme or appropriate? And again, 27% of Republicans themselves say that the rhetoric of Republican politicians is too extreme. And the 64% similar number of independents say that the rhetoric of Republican politicians is too extreme. So roughly 3 out of 10 members of each party believe that the rhetoric of their own politicians is too extreme. That should give everyone pause. And this also shows that about a third of each of the party believe that the parties are too much into the extreme. And the parties have to take note that about a third of their base, this makes up the common sense majority. And if you take a third of Republicans and a third of Democrats and 40% of Americans who are independents, the largest bloc within American politics today is, call it the common sense majority. These are voters who want reason in their politics and fights around issues, not extreme rhetoric that leads to political violence. And at some point, these voters will coalesce or they will snap against each of the parties themselves because the pressure is just too much. When we ask in the poll, do you think that today's political rhetoric is a cause of violence or is not responsible for political violence? 72%, over 7 in 10 voters say that it's leading to violence. And that includes 80% of Democrats, 61% of Republicans, and 76% of independents. And there are also bad news for social media companies. Still, we asked, do you think that social media is helping discourage political violence? It's encouraging it or is not having any effect on it? And by a ratio of over 4x, people believe that it's encouraging political violence. 64% say it's encouraging political violence, 15% say it's discouraging it, and about 20% say no effect. But what's remarkable about these numbers is the consistency across the political spectrum. 63% of Democrats, 66% of Republicans, 64% of independents, others all say that social media is encouraging political violence. And again, this is a warning signal and a red flag for social media companies and the need to do more to create better conversations within the platforms while still preserving free speech. I'll add in a positive data point here, not to make it too somber for our viewers, but when we ask the question, do you think that America is hopelessly divided, or could it come together with leadership that tried harder to bring the country together? 56% say that it can come together with better leadership. And again, there's unanimous agreement across the political spectrum. 54% of Democrats, 60% of Republicans, and 56% of independents basically say that the country can come together with better political leadership. And so the data is very striking. I'll add to it that we even asked where recent political assassinations, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, or Minnesota Democratic State Representative Melissa Hortman, justified or not justified. And while for a majority of the country, let's say roughly around 8 in 10 respondents, it was not justified, and they believe that this type of political violence should never be justified as factions and political parties pursue their ends. For about 2 in 10, they say justified. And that's striking. Again, no society can survive that level of, let's call it the normalization of political violence, or the desensitization vis-a-vis political violence. So there's a lot of work to be done by both parties, given this information. And we even asked, some of the recent assassination attempts around President Trump, around Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, around Governor Shapiro, around former Speaker Pelosi, who had her home invaded. And again, it's similar figures, this 80-20 breakdown, where 20% say, yeah, it was justified. That's scary because it affects everyone across the political spectrum, regardless of who you are. And it's incumbent upon all of the leaders and both of the parties and beyond to tone things down and to make sure that this type of political violence doesn't become normalized and does voters don't become desensitized towards it. So again, striking figures, and obviously, I'm sure you have many reactions to what I've just worked through in the data.
Certainly a lot of warning signs in those numbers there. I'm curious about who you described as the common sense voters, those voters who think that even people in their own party are too extreme on the right, on the left, independents. I mean, at what point what happens to them if they think that the boiling point is just too high? Would they flip parties? Would they stay at home? What does voting look like for that group?
You said it exactly right. I mean, I think that this is potentially a return to swing voter politics, and frankly, it will be good for the country because for the last 25 years we've had campaign after campaign after campaign that focuses on base voters rather than swing voters. And swing voters, these are issues voters, these are voters that are less about the red meat. They are a lot more about coming together and reaching sensible conclusions and forcing the two parties to compromise, right? But we forget that politics, at the end of the day, is the art of the deal, is the art of compromise, and none of the parties quite are doing that, as we see in this government shutdown. So potentially there's a silver lining within all of this data. But again, from what we see right now, the current snapshot, some very, very striking figures, which are frankly very concerning as well.
I think concerning to say the least, and I hope that you continue to have a finger on the pulse there so we can monitor that month to month. I do, before I let you go, want to turn to some international issues, both the Israel-Hamas war as well as the war between Russia and Ukraine. I want to talk about the Israel-Hamas war first. President Trump released a 20-point Gaza plan that would in part end the war and release the hostages. And Israel and Hamas are negotiating this. This comes as we mark the second anniversary of October 7th. What do people make of the progress toward peace here?
Well, 56% support the 21-point peace plan put forward by President Trump. And there is obviously a lot of wariness and a lot of tension in terms of what people are seeing coming out of Gaza, and obviously with the anniversary of October the 7th, and Americans have been very consistently pro-Israel from the very beginning, and three-fourths have supported the need for Hamas to release all of the remaining hostages without any conditions or face serious consequences, which is a position that Trump has reiterated, and that there could not be peace until Hamas frees all of the hostages and leaves Gaza. Only in such a situation could peace be possible. That's very much reflected in the president's 21-point peace plan. And so voters are for it, and they would like to see an end to the war. We asked them, should Israel accept the plan? Close to 80% said yes. Should the Arab states and various factions support the plan? Similar numbers said yes. We asked them the same question about Hamas. 78% said yes. So American voters' tolerance for waffling when it comes to reaching a consensus to end the war is very, very small, very, very small, and that gives President Trump a lot of room to act and to maneuver. And so people are ready for this chapter to be closed, for the Palestinians to be given a path forward, for Israel to have security going forward. And, we even asked the question, which we haven't asked for a couple of years now, what kind of a configuration and state do you support coming out of this? And 69% basically say, for there to be two states, Israel and Palestine. Only about 20% say the Arab states should absorb the Palestinians, and only about 11% basically would support Israel taking over. And so voters are, again, remarkably common sense in their approach to the conflict, and they would like to see an end to this conflict sooner rather than later.
What about Russia's war against Ukraine? Because we have seen that go on now for well over 3 years. And there were some promising moments, especially over the summer. President Trump had summits with both Russian President Putin as well as Ukrainian President Zelensky. And President Trump promised a swift end to the war, or there were going to be consequences. The White House said that Trump's summit with Putin was for Trump to, quote, walk away with a better understanding of how we can end this war. And it doesn't seem like there is that understanding right now, because since these summits, we've seen Russia launch its largest air attack against Ukraine, as well as multiple Russian drones enter Poland's airspace. What do voters make of this war, as well as President Trump's involvement in trying to end it?
Well, in general, voters have low expectations that Trump will bring the Israel-Hamas conflict to an end and the Ukraine-Russia conflict to an end as well. About 2/3 don't believe that he will be successful, but they support the president's actions. So, as we talked about before, 56% supported the president's 21-point peace plan. And actually, I forgot to mention, when we tested on a blind basis and we test the actual elements of the plan, support rises to 83%. And in a similar fashion, when you ask about Trump's efforts to end the war in Ukraine, 65% support it. 77% say that the U.S. should oppose additional pressure in the form of economic sanctions to force Russia to try to end the war. And 56% support the push by President Trump that foreign governments not buy oil and gas from Russia and be punished with tariffs if they do so. So again, that's another pressure element on Russia. And the president has a lot of support and a lot of license and latitude to really move on to that conflict next and try to bring it to a close. 68% would support him if he gave more weaponry to Ukraine as another pressure point on the Russians. So I think that if we're thinking about possible breakthroughs for the administration, the resolution of these two conflicts seem to have momentum and seem to be on the cusp. And frankly, President Trump, if he's able to achieve any one of these resolutions, let alone both of them, I mean, by any standard, I would personally say he deserves a Nobel Prize because these are very complex conflicts rooted in hundreds of years tensions, if not thousands of years tensions, and being able to provide a path forward for Israel, for the Palestinians, for the Ukrainians and the Europeans will be, I mean, these are breakthrough moments in global diplomacy and in terms of issues of war and peace. So I think that this might be an area where actually the administration is able to score points with voters within the next month to 3 months. And there's a lot of analysts that are looking at this and are cautiously optimistic in terms of where it may lead with both of those conflicts. But certainly, Ukraine-Russia is going to take more time than Israel and Gaza.
I think these numbers really are just a fascinating snapshot in time, especially as we're seeing such developing conflicts and issues like these two international conflicts, like the government shutdown that's still ongoing. And there's plenty of issues and plenty of developments, I'm sure, that remain to be seen as we head into the next month. Dritan, per usual, thank you so much for breaking down the numbers. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much. And you can look up the poll online at harvardharrispoll.com. Thank you.